So, welcome back to episode whatever I'm up to in this untitled series of rants. I thought there would be the most value in speaking about the topics which would be applicable to the most people. That just makes sense to me. And I think it is worth revisiting the basics. And I think dosing and levels is the topic that would be applicable to the most people who would be watching this. So I'm going to talk about that. Now, if you would like a written version of this, you can check out TRT 101. It is on my website. It is a written instruction book on how to do TRT. It is the instruction book that I think should come with TRT, akin to the instruction books that came with the video games I played on the Nintendo 64 when I was a child. That was the inspiration for writing that book. I think dosing is the simplest part of TRT. And I don't think that dosing TRT is rocket science, which is why I am often baffled by how many providers get this wrong. And I think that educating the patient on a basic understanding is not to give the patient free rein and authority to adjust their doses themselves and take whatever the fuck they want, because that almost always ends up in a mess. And if you would like some evidence of that, you can check out basically any Facebook group on TRT. But the point of these videos and for these topics is for people to be able to get educated so that you can either have an informed conversation with your provider, not to twist their arm into prescribing the medication at your own will, but so that you can seek out a provider who actually knows what they're talking about because you know what to look for. So I'm going to be speaking about total testosterone in nanomole per liter and free testosterone in picomole per liter. They are the units that we use in Australia, which are used often throughout Europe. I am aware that this is not the units that are typically used in America, but I'm also aware that the majority of content has been made with the units that are typically used in America. So you guys can convert it, or you can watch another video. I don't fucking care. So total testosterone, free testosterone, what numbers should you be aiming for? What numbers cause negative symptoms? This conversation is the prerequisite to every other piece of TRT content being valid, because if you don't get the foundations right, then you can't build anything on top of it. And if you can't get your dose right, you can't get your TRT levels right, then you inherently can't actually do testosterone replacement therapy properly. So I think free testosterone is more important than total testosterone when it comes to symptoms, but I do not think it is the end all and be all of how testosterone works in the body. I don't think it's that well understood, and I think it is often oversimplified, but we do often have to simplify things for the sake of discussion and for the sake of creating meaning. So we do typically look at free testosterone when it comes to determining if someone's symptoms are coming from hypogonadism. The problem is that, one, selling a man testosterone is like selling a thirsty guy in the desert a glass of water. Everyone wants more testosterone because it is marketable, it is cool, it is appealing, it is sexy from a marketing standpoint. But what people really need to understand is if you take a list of all the different symptoms of male hypogonadism, you will find that those are very ambiguous symptoms that can be caused by a variety of things. So what is very important to ascertain, firstly, is whether the symptoms that you're experiencing match the testosterone levels that you have. For example, I tend to see, and for everyone crying in the comments before they even watch the whole video, there will be exceptions to the rule. Numbers are not the be all and end all. It is numbers and symptoms. But we do kind of have to draw rough lines in the sand to make meaning. So I'm going to draw some numbers. I'm going to throw some numbers out there. If you want to cry about it, go ahead. I'm not going to read the comments. So I see hypogonadal symptoms occur under 400 for free testosterone. Now, you can be hypogonadal with symptoms in the low 400s, sure. But this is what I would throw out there, is that the higher your free testosterone, the less likely that your negative symptoms are coming from low testosterone, especially if your negative symptoms are severe. For example, if you wake up every morning wanting to self-delete, wanting to put a gun in your mouth, you physically just can't get out of bed, you have brutal anxiety and depression, and your dick doesn't work at all, and you have a free testosterone of like 390, Sure, low testosterone may be part of what's going on, but it would be unlikely that that is the be all and end all of your negative issues. Now, if you had a free testosterone of, let's say, 60, like under 100, double digits, that more matches the severity of those symptoms. So severity is an important thing because one, you may have multiple comorbid conditions which are causing the problem, or two, which is a huge issue, is that your hypogonadism may only be part of the negative issues that you're dealing with, the negative health problems that you have, and it may only be a piece of the puzzle. And what I constantly see is guys trying to out testosterone all their problems. And what is very common is guys try to out biology their psychology. Now, the issue with this is that it's very common for psychological issues to build and manifest on top of hypogonadal experiences in life, especially if you've never even had high testosterone to begin with during your formative years. But what you also need to understand is fixing the foundation doesn't build the fucking house. So if you've had low testosterone your whole life and then now you give yourself the testosterone levels that you should have had all along, you are not then by default going to become the man that you should have been all along. It's not that simple. I wish it was, but it's not. And there's often work that has to be done with this, but this is going into a bit of a tangent, so I'm going to circle back. When it comes to optimizing what your free testosterone level should be, your total testosterone is going to be a means to that end, which is going to determine your dosing. And what I see, and this is my strategy, and you're welcome to copy and paste this strategy if you're a practitioner or a provider and you want to use this with your clients, please do. Please copy and paste this and steal this. And if you want to do it differently, or your provider did it differently, or you have a different viewpoint, cool. Make your own video. There's multiple ways to skin a cat. I like that analogy. There's not one way to do TRT, but this is just the version of TRT that I think works best. And again, yes, there will always be exceptions to the rule. I'm going to talk about the reference range, which is, I'm sure people are already triggered just because I mentioned the R word. But the reference range is useful because now we're not talking about units. And the reference range will differ from lab to lab. But I think a good start is to take someone to the top of the reference range. Now, does the reference range reference what is and isn't physiological? No. If you think that anything above the reference range is super physiological, you are wrong. This is not what the reference range is. The reference range represents the average of the last X number of men who've come in and got their testosterone levels checked. And they calculate the mean and they calculate the standard deviation. This is why the reference range will vary drastically from lab to lab, country to country, massively. And you see this particularly when you work with clients all over the world. So why do I say to come up to the top of the reference range? Well, because one, it just gives us somewhere that we can call a ballpark estimate. But firstly, if you double or triple your testosterone levels in 8 weeks, your body needs time to adjust to that. So if you're someone who needs to be at double the top of the reference range to optimize your testosterone protocol and to remove your negative symptoms, let's say you need to have your free testosterone at 1200 to 1500, which does happen, that's a hell of a big shot if you started with a fifth of those levels to begin with in 8 weeks. So you can expect a much bumpier ride while your body adjusts to that. And what I don't see the harm in personally is shooting for about the top of the reference range, a little bit north, a little bit south, depending on the individual's age, depending on what else they have going on. If someone is obese, if someone is elderly, if someone is drinking a bunch of alcohol and hasn't sorted their fucking shit out and cut that out, then maybe a little bit lower, maybe a little bit higher if they're a bit younger, a bit healthier, maybe they have experience using testosterone in the past. It varies person to person, but for the sake of throwing out some rules, people really need to understand that exceptions don't disprove rules. Otherwise, it would be impossible for us to actually have any benchmarks or ballparks to play with. So I think shooting for the top of the reference range to begin with is a good place to start because your body needs a few months to adjust to doubling your testosterone levels, and then you can work up from there if you need to. You don't need to rush to the finish line with testosterone replacement therapy because your body needs time to adjust. It takes weeks, it takes months. I would argue that it takes years for your body to adjust to higher testosterone levels, just like it took years for you to go through puberty and come out the other side a fully grown adult, which some of you are still working on based on the comments that I read on YouTube these days. So I like to start guys off, I like to recommend that your prescribing doctor your medical doctor, because I'm not a medical doctor, works with about 150 milligrams a week to start with for the average guy. Now, if your SHBG is higher, blah, 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 yep, sure, exceptions. But I think somewhere within the ballpark of 150, you can start a bit lower, you can start a bit higher. I don't give a shit. But that's a good starting point to bring someone's total testosterone up to about 30, 25 to 35. Now, there'll be variance either side, but on average, if your binding proteins are kind of an average level, that will bring you up to a free testosterone of about 600 to 900, depending on the guy. And that's a good place to start. If you go much lower than that, you're not actually going to get a huge difference from when they started. Because if you only bring their free testosterone up from a 400 to a 500, that juice is not worth the squeeze. It's not worth shutting down your natural testosterone production for 100 points of free testosterone. It's a fucking waste of time. And then what I like to do is work up in increments of 5 to 10 milligrams per shot, because that's the easiest amount to adjust on the insulin syringe. So if you're doing 2 injections a week and you're at 150 milligrams a week and you want to titrate up, I like to titrate up, depending on how much we want to move by, 20 milligrams a week, maybe even up to 30 milligrams a week if they're a low responder. But 5 milligrams a shot, they're doing 2 to 3 injections per week. That gives you about 10 to 30 milligrams, depending on the guy, depending on what you're doing, and working up in increments every 3 to 4 months, rather than just overshooting the end goal and then having to work back down, because the individual still needs time for their body to adjust to the testosterone dose. There's a lot of systems which are governed by androgens, and these systems need time to adjust, especially if they've never been at that testosterone level before, so that you can reduce your chance of getting side effects and make the whole experience a whole bunch less uncomfortable. So where do people end up? Somewhere between top quartile of the range and double the top of the reference range. 600 up to 1,500, sometimes a bit beyond that. Dr. Keith Nichols has a good quote where once you reach a certain point of free testosterone, and we did a podcast recently where we said that that was about 1,500, if you're still having negative issues, there's a better chance that it doesn't have to do with testosterone. There does have to be a point where we go, hey, let's stop throwing more testosterone at this and fix the root cause problem. But what is so important to understand, and this is the part that I always emphasize with my clients, and I think is often overlooked when it comes to guys who are only focusing on symptoms, is that you have to get blood work done, not just for your total and free testosterone, but for all your health markers together, as well as things like your blood pressure, things like monitoring your sleep, to make sure that you're actually tolerating the dose, because taking a bunch of something that makes you feel good doesn't necessarily mean it's making you healthier, especially if you're pushing your levels up into an actual supraphysiological territory that is going to disrupt a lot of your biological processes, and then you run risk of side effects in the future. Now, what is that line that becomes supraphysiological? It varies person to person. An alcoholic, obese 70-year-old and a healthy 21-year-old are going to have very different points where testosterone becomes supraphysiological, because their physiology is different. And this is the part that people just don't seem to be able to wrap their head around, is what is supraphysiological for you may not be what is supraphysiological for that guy. And what is supraphysiological for you right now, i.e. 2 weeks after you fucking start TRT, may be different than what is super physiological in a year or two down the line when you've gotten your shit together. So shoot for a reasonable level to start with, and then work up gradually until your symptoms resolve. But understand that the perfect dose of testosterone is not going to resolve the negative symptoms that come from other hormone deficiencies, that come from poor diet and lifestyle, or you also need to understand that you can take your testosterone up to whatever number you think is perfect, but it's not going to work overnight. It takes time to work. And this is why, if you're a new TRT patient and you've never done this before and you have absolutely no fucking idea what you're doing, watch videos like this, read books like mine. I think mine's pretty good. I'm biased. Get in groups, get amongst the discussions around this to educate yourself, but don't think that that gives you the skill set to actually be able to execute this. You need to be able to work with someone who's emotionally removed from the situation, who has expertise, who can guide you, set realistic expectations, and make sure that you get the outcomes that you are looking for. Hope that helps.